Welcome to this week's edition of Freedom and Prosperity Radio, the weekly radio news magazine presented by the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. You can find out more about us at virginiainstitute.org. Certainly a somber weekend as we remember those who made the ultimate sacrifice in defense of our freedoms and our prosperity here on a Memorial Day weekend. And one of the promises we make to those who fell in the line of duty to defend our freedom is to make sure that our posterity knows it, to ourselves and our posterity. You may have heard that somewhere. And our posterity are our children. And how do we pass down those blessings of liberty? And one of those organizations that has grown out of the COVID-19 lockdowns, the restrictions, and out of the critical race theory manure heap is the Parents Defending Education. You can find them online at defendinged.org, and there are parents all across the Commonwealth that have been talking with them. And Elizabeth Schultz, Senior Fellow at Parents Defending Education, is our first guest this week. Elizabeth, thank you. And again, thank you to everyone who's put this together, this effort together, and in a very short period of time have become one of the most sought-out organizations in Virginia. How are you doing this weekend?
Well, I hope it's not just in Virginia. I hope it's nationwide, because our education problem certainly isn't limited to the Commonwealth, but really, frankly, many of the bellwether school districts like Fairfax, signal what happens in the rest of the country. So, Joe, thank you so much for having me and talking about this truly crucial topic of what's happening in our K-12, and certainly then it goes on into our higher ed institutions.
There is nothing to me more despicable, no matter what the context is, than to tell a child that they're bad just because. I've been in enough nurseries to know full well that there is not a sociologist on this planet that can point at one or the other and say they're the ones who are going to be bad. And so I think, when you see bad kids, bad adults, they've been taught bad behavior through their lives. But children, just telling them for something as arbitrary as the color of their skin that they're bad and must be punished for the sins of someone they've never heard of before is just offensive on so many levels. And that is the core of critical race theory educational building blocks. And they've tried to re-nuance the name and come up with different ways. But this all is about turning the tables and tell the white kids they're bad just because of the color of their skin, for as horrible a reason as they may have done that to the black kids 150 years ago.
Well, you're absolutely right. Our children should not be an experiment, nor our classrooms a laboratory for embedding so-called critical race theory. It is sowing division among America's families. It's teaching hate to our children, and it's teaching hate for our country. What happened to e pluribus unum? We're in a situation where school boards across the country are rewriting curriculum, they're renaming schools, they're hiring chiefs of equity and replacing academics as the focus. Mm-hmm. And what's happening is that our children are becoming the spoils of an ideological and cultural war. Thomas Sowell warned us about this. He said, education is not merely neglected in many schools today, but it is replaced to a great extent by ideological indoctrination. Mm-hmm. And that has been ramped up with such fury with people who are race baiting, huckstering, and selling with taxpayer dollars a massive ideological shift that is intending to brainwash children all the way down to the youngest. And I don't mean just the youngest elementary grades. I'm talking about books and worksheets and things being printed for pre-K and kindergarten-aged children, such that, by the time they reach the upper elementary grades, the work is done for them. We're indoctrinating, teachers across the country in every community. There's no community that is exempt from this. Our higher math classes and science classes are being, characterized as racist, and we're dumbing down the entire education that's been going on for decades, but it is a rapid development where people who withhold or hold Marxist ideology, hate for America, and want to see a teardown of the structure of what makes our country great, of what makes our country exceptional, and has given so many people a leg up and a path forward. It's why people from around the globe want to come here. If we were a racist nation, people wouldn't be, trekking across our southern border and trying to break into this country if it didn't create the opportunity. So why would we want to allow, as parents and concerned citizens and taxpayers, to allow this erosive, poisonous, ideological characterization of what it means to be an American child and an American student to take root in our schools? And it is something that we have to join together with a fury and fight back against, because our children and our nation's future are worth fighting for.
Elizabeth, I've met Dr. Kendi. I've debated him on television, and I knew within minutes that he was a reverse racist. Or that is technically a misnomer. He is perhaps one of the most frightening racists I've met because he wants to try to, or in his mind, undo racism with more racism. But really, the group that bothers me the most in this story is not the folks like Dr. Kendi, who may be a true believer in this. It is the politicians who are allowing for the quick media pat on the back and the Pyrrhic moment of good spin on the evening news, because I don't even think they are halfway in realization as to what they're bringing about.
Well, sadly, I think you may be wrong. I think they know exactly what they're bringing about, and I think the media is complicit in it. I think that we have people who are profiting off of this. I would hazard to say that there's millions of taxpayer dollars being dumped into consultants from places like New York City that are writing new curriculum and writing these professional development contracts to train or retrain. I mean, this is really cultural Maoism of re-educating our population, and by taking employees of school systems and dividing them by race and dividing them by gender and saying, you need to go and apologize, this white fragility group needs to go here. This toxin is invading our school systems, and it is going to take, a Woolworth's counter moment of parents and taxpayers standing up and saying, we are not going to tolerate this. You are not going to corrupt and erode our education system and create a systemic, create systemic racism. You're absolutely right in that there's no such thing as reverse racism.
Right.
There's either racism or there isn't racism. And people like Ibram Kendi selling this toxic, poisonous ideology will only cause a total breakdown of family, of community, of nation, of the future, of prosperity, and respect for our Constitution and civics and rule of law and individual liberty in our children. And it is something that we need to protect as if, we're protecting our own house. These are our jewels, these are our treasures, and we can't just, fade to black. We can't be afraid of being called names by people, because these people they're not teaching critical thinking to our children. They're teaching them, you must think what we teach you to think. And it's a terrifying thought, but, Edmund Burke said, nobody makes a greater mistake than he who does nothing because he could only do a little. Everybody can contribute to this conversation. Everybody can hammer their local school board. Everybody can hammer their superintendent. Everybody can think about, how do we contribute to saving first of all, education at my closest level. You may not be able to fix the federal government. You may not even be able to fix your state government. But at the closest level, people have to reflect, what can I contribute? What op-ed can I write? What letter can I write? What school board meeting can I protest? What can I do to start to be the parts per million that turns back this sea of toxin that is flooding into our society?
Elizabeth Schultz, Senior Fellow with Parents Defending Education, defendinged.org. There's even a place there if you've seen something in your school, maybe your kids or grandkids have brought something home, you can send it on a tip site. Part of their site is send them tips as to what's being done. We've certainly seen on the state level where we're taking out advanced mathematics teaching. We have schools that are giving passing grades for simply showing that you did some mathematical equations, even if they were the wrong ones, so that kids can pass. This is a mad conflagration of everybody gets a trophy. You mentioned experimenting now with this critical race theory. But you also mentioned, Edmund Burke, and, we all need to do a little. I think a lot of people, especially after the way President Trump was incinerated in the press, are afraid of going out and saying, I want to be a conservative on my local school board and say no to these progressive educators, the school superintendents, because they know their home address is going to be posted to some crazy lunatic right-wing reparational socialist website, and their car is going to be keyed, and their wife or husband is going to be harassed, and their children are going to be harassed as well. The mob rule in this cannot be underplayed, but we need to kind of band together to fight against it, and that's why I think your organization has been so important to everyone this year.
Well, I will say that, I have to give heart to people to find the courage that our children, your grandchildren, your godchildren, nieces, nephews, if you don't have children, the nation's children and our future are worth fighting for. If we are faint of heart now, we lose our country. We are in a cultural war. And the future of our country is at stake. I can't state that strongly enough. They are committed. They're committed enough to come for our children. Are we committed enough to fight for them? And critical race theory is not the critical issue of our time. Energy independence, medical discovery, space, and cyber defense, for our nation's, critical infrastructure. These are the things that our children should be prepared to enter into and find and discover solutions for the true critical issues of our time. And instead, their minds are being diverted. And how do we move forward as a society and retain, the greatest experiment in democracy that's ever existed on Earth of all time, unless we're willing to stand up and say, you know what? You don't get to label me because you have crazed theories and embrace Marxism and embrace, a cultural revolution that is a re-education camp in its modern day sense.
Elizabeth,
somebody must stand in the gap, and I think it begins with looking in the mirror and saying, what can we do? You can't do everything, but you can do something. Going to defendinged.org, asking, what can I do? This is what I've seen in my local community, contributing financially. All of it can happen. Supporting a local candidate if you can't be a local candidate for school board. Everybody can do something, and everybody must do something in order to reclaim our heritage, our birthright, and the future of this country for our children.
And the real despite in this is that they're pitching it under, they've created this poverty by taxation and then the COVID shutdowns, and they've devastated communities economically. And now they're coming in and saying it was done racially. It was done socioeconomically by Marxists who wanted more government control over industry, centralizing it and centralizing it some more, and then re-centralizing that until there were very few job opportunities in many of our communities, Elizabeth. And that's what we want to fix. And it isn't racist. It's poverty, for the sake of governmental control. Vote for me and I'll send some money. It's the fruits of the Great Society, which ironically were started. The Great Society was designed to get the black community to stop burning their towns down and rioting. How's that working? All these years later, we still have black communities in flames, and nobody's any better off economically. You talked about getting involved and getting in the face of the school boards. Talk about, making sure that, groups of you are at these meetings to speak and in the public comment sessions to force these school boards to answer for things like passing kids who have no grasp of mathematics at all anymore, or dropping even advanced mathematics from curriculums and some of the things that are in there, or the horrific books that they're teaching our kids.
So there should not be a local school board meeting where there is not a presence of local parents and local taxpayers making a stand on this and calling out school board members by name who are supporting the embedding of critical race theory, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which are all code words for critical race theory, and diverting taxpayer resources and the whole of education from pre-kindergarten all the way to 12th grade towards an ideological outcome of their desire. And if parents aren't standing up at school board meetings and protesting outside of them and bringing their signs and writing their school board, then you're not playing a part. So if at the most local level, you could be doing that. You could be filing Freedom of Information Act requests in order to get copies of contracts and finding out how much consultants are being paid. We're at a point where they are working to separate us, to segregate us, and to instill a sectarian mindset that the government is the keeper of the individual. And that is the inverse of why we were founded. And we need to constantly, preciously guard that individual liberty and individual responsibility are the path to retaining freedom. And that's what they want to tear down on us, is create this dependency, create universal basic income, create that we are reliant upon government. And never forget, schools are the government. School teachers are employees of the government. School boards are your most local form of government. There are over 90,000 school board members in the country. It's the largest body of elected officials in the nation, and it is the most unwatched, most unvoted for, and easiest to obtain seat. And so if all of the people who are controlling your local school board and curriculum and the direction of the education of children in our country, 51 million children are in K-12 public schools. If they can do it, you can do it.
Yep, absolutely. And there are toolkits. If you go to defendinged.org, at very least, email the folks there and ask for tips. Say, I'm concerned about these things. I've never done this before. There are so many folks who are going through the exact same things you are, that at Defending Ed, it's becoming a great clearinghouse of almost a support group for folks who have never but now have been activated. What about and I see this as a great opportunity. We have candidates for statewide office, at least from the Republican Party, who are loud proponents of school choice. The money follows the student kind of school choice, not the patty cake that they passed a few years ago here in Virginia. Is that really the tipping point where parents can start voting with their feet to get out of these public indoctrination camps?
They certainly can. Of course, that's a big goal because school choice often depends upon what your local school board decides. So I'm not saying that it's a folly, but I am saying that if you don't control your local school board, the opportunity, for example, in Virginia, I believe something along the lines of only about 12 charter schools have ever been approved. And I think there are maybe only 8 or 9 going concerns at this point, because the decision is up to the local school board.
Yeah, they're not really charter schools. They're not really classically charter schools. They're just another public school.
No, they aren't. Yeah, no, they aren't. And in the end, this is a little bit of what conservatives have done for decades, is they've sort of relinquished or ceded public education. They thought, my children will be fine. I'm raising my children. I'm giving them, either religious education, or they're in scouts, or I'm coaching their teams, and my children will be fine. And in the meantime, what has happened is the bill has come due, because the millions and millions and millions, tens of millions of children that have been relegated to the public school system, where we've taken our eye off the ball, have now had the outsized, and will always have the outsized influence on our greater culture. And so we are graduating children that are going to be our doctors, our lawyers, our real estate agents, our car mechanics, and everything in between. And who is creating, critical thinking children that are going to be graduating, that are going to be the greatest part of our society? So fighting for all kids to have not equity in education. We can't be wrapped into this trope of there need to be proportional outcomes. This is what they're saying, in critical race theory. There need to be proportional outcomes based on the percentage of children based on their race. Nobody cares. Right. Nobody should care about the race of the child. Only should we care about how do we move and create the greatest, most high-level education possible for every child, regardless of race. That's where the pushback needs to happen, is say, we don't care about the race of the children. We care about what are you doing for all children, all children. We should not be inserting, the race of a child in order to talk about their outcome. And if we can, as conservatives say, it doesn't matter what the end game is here. Whether you call it we're gonna have school choice, we're gonna have vouchers, we're gonna have charter schools. It's irrelevant. All education of all American children, K through 12, is in the end the greatest predictor of what is going to happen. Like Abraham Lincoln, the philosophy of education in the classroom in one generation is the philosophy of government in the next. We are in a situation where we can see the unfolding of our society, and we're going to have to want badly enough to become involved to stop the other side from doing this to our children, to our culture, to our nation, to our Constitution and our rule of law. We have to be engaged in the fight. We have to be paying attention. We have to submit Freedom of Information Act requests. We have to attend school board meetings. We have to write letters to our school board. We have to run candidates. We have to support candidates. We have to fund candidates. We have to, at the state level, certainly paying attention to who is involved at the highest levels of our government, because they're selecting the state boards of education. Although the further you get away from your local school district, the less that has to do with the overall education of your children. Your greatest influence is going to be to flex your arm, flex your voice, and flex your vote in your community.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for everything you guys are doing. And I will add this, especially in school board levels, find the local school beat reporter for your area newspaper, even if it's a weekly, because generally speaking, they want to see conflict. They want to see friction. They want to see drama. Even local TV stations will pick up the story of parents rising up against the school board because it makes good copy, even if they don't know the ideology of it, especially at the smaller levels. I would suggest that as well. Defendinged.org. There's a great column up there. I believe you wrote this, Elizabeth. Our local school boards need parental supervision. It's our after-school meeting. But thank you so much for everything you do. You're truly an inspiration to all these parents in Virginia. And please go on there, defendinged.org. Help them every way you can. And thank you for taking some time out this week with us here on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.
Well, I appreciate the invitation, Joe. As a former school board member myself for 8 years and a former U.S. Department of Education official, I have skin in the game. I've done it. And I'm saying there's nothing special about me or anybody else who's already on a school board or is fighting for the education of kids. Everybody who hears this interview is equally capable of making a difference.
Absolutely.
And my message to everyone is hashtag take back your school boards.
I love it. Yeah, let's use that. And coming up next, the president of the Virginia Citizens Defense League, Philip Van Cleve, of the Supreme Court and the Second Amendment, back together again. We'll get into that with Philip next on Freedom and Prosperity Radio.